Hello, welcome to the lecture of ARTCademy, Arts and Crafts Academy. This lecture deals with the decision making. The ARTCademy project aims to preserve and strengthen the European artisan sector through two ways. First, protecting the ancestral knowledge of traditional crafts, especially if they are at risk of disappearing, and second, by providing craft firms, practitioners, and entrepreneurs with training and useful tools for their continuity and commercial development. More information about this project, as well as the other training courses, can be found on the project website. This project runs from 2018 until 20 and is co-financed by the European Commission Erasmus Plus program. My name is Peter Gál. I am a teacher at the Faculty of Management, Comenius University in Bratislava, which is one of the partners of the ARTCademy project, and I will accompany you through this lecture.
This lecture deals with decision making, and after watching it, you should be able to define decision making concept and understand the role of decision making in organization management process, identify main characteristics of decision making process, describe the 8 steps in the decision making process, distinguish between different decision making styles, identify pros and cons of individual and group decision making process, and finally determine what an ethical decision is, identify situational influences on ethical decision making, and identifying points of leverage for managing and improving ethical decision making.
A decision can be defined as a course of action purposely chosen from a set of alternatives to achieve objectives or goals. Decision making is an integral part of modern management. Especially rational or sound decision making is taken as primary function of management in every company. This course is meant to help you to develop your decision making skill, be more conscious about the difference between the individual and group decision making, and identify your personal decision making styles.
Individuals at all levels and in all areas or organizations make decisions. This is, they make choices from two or more alternatives. Decisions are made in the best interest of the organization. For that matter, decisions made by the organization are to lighten the way forward. Every organization needs to make decisions at one point or another as a part of managerial process. As a matter of fact, capable of taking critical decisions is one of the many attributes that every manager should have, be it top level or middle or entry level. For instance, top level managers make decisions about their organization's goals, where to locate manufacturing facilities, what new markets move into, and what products or services to offer. Middle and lower level managers make decisions about weekly or monthly production schedules, problems that arise, pay rises, and disciplining employees. While small organization involves all levels of managers, complex organizations largely depend on a team of professionals, especially trained to make all sorts of decisions. However, making decisions isn't something that only managers do. All organizational members make decisions that affect their jobs and the organizations they work for. As it was said in previous section, decision making is an integral part of modern management. Especially rational or sound decision making is taken as the primary function of management. Decisions play important roles as they determine both organizational and managerial activities. A decision can be defined as a course of action purposely chosen from a set of alternatives to achieve organizational or managerial objectives or goals. According to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, the term decision-making means the process of deciding about something important, especially in a group of people or in an organization. As Chris Augury claims, making a decision implies that there are alternative choices to be considered, and in such a case, we want not only to identify as many of these alternatives as possible, but to choose the one that has the highest probability of success or effectiveness and best fits with our goals, desires, lifestyle, values, and so on. The two important ideas here are that first, there must be some genuine alternatives to choose from. Note that do it or don't do it does not qualify as a set of alternatives. Only do this or do something else really qualifies. Second, every decision must be made in the light of some standard of judgment. This standard usually is expressed in the form of criteria which reflects the values and preferences of the decision maker. The values and preferences are often influenced by certain factors, cooperative rules or culture, law, best practices, and so forth. Decision making has many features, some of which are considered below. Decision making implies choice. Decision making is choosing from among two or more alternative courses of action. Thus, it is the process of selection of one solution out of many available. The alternative selected may be correct or incorrect. This will, however, be decided in the future when the results manifest. Continuous activity or process. Decision making is a continuous and dynamic process. It pervades all organizational activity. Managers have to take decisions on various policy and administrative matters. It is a never-ending activity in management. Mental or intellectual activity. Decision-making is a mental as well as intellectual activity or process and requires knowledge, skills, experience, and maturity on the part of the decision maker. Based on reliable information or feedback. Good decisions are always based on reliable information. The quality of decision making at all levels of an organization can be improved with the support of an effective and efficient management information system. Goal-oriented process. Decision-making aims at providing a solution to a given problem or difficulty faced by an organization. Means and not the end. Decision-making is a means for solving a problem or for achieving a target or objective and not the end in itself. Relates to a specific problem. Decision making is not identical with problem solving, but it has its roots in a problem itself. Time-consuming activity. Decision making is a time-consuming activity as various aspects need careful consideration before taking the final decision. For decision makers, various steps are required to be completed. This makes decision making a time-consuming activity. Needs effective communication. Taken decisions need to be communicated to all concerned parties for suitable follow-up actions. Such decisions will remain only on the paper if they are not communicated to concerned persons. Follow-up actions will not be possible in the absence of effective communication. Pervasive process. Decision-making process is all-pervasive. This means managers working at all levels have to take decisions on matters within their jurisdiction. Responsible job. Decision-making is a responsible job as wrong decisions prove to be too costly to the organization. Decision makers should be mature, experienced, knowledgeable, and rational in their approach. Decision making needs not be treated as routine and casual activity. It is a delicate and responsible job. The right decisions often provoke resistance, and managers should be prepared for that. We can see a certain parallel with the treatment of a sick patient. Medical procedures, such as operations or injections, are often unpleasant, and pills just taste bad. However, without treatment, the patient's health would not improve. New decisions often go in a different direction than it has been in the past and bring changes to the organization that many do not easily accept. However, without these changes brought by decisions, organizations are likely to survive in the long run.
Different decision makers use different decision styles. Which decision making style is used often depends on the personality of the decision maker himself, but also on the specific decision making situation. In this section, we will deal with decision making styles in terms of the method of information processing and the levels of participation in decision making.
Decision-making styles differ along two main dimensions. The first is an individual's way of thinking. Some of us are more rational and logical in the way we process information. Others tend to be intuitive and creative. The other dimension describes an individual's tolerance to ambiguity. Again, some of us have low tolerance for ambiguity. Some of us can tolerate high levels of ambiguity. When we diagram these two dimensions, four decision-making styles are evident: directive, analytical, conceptual, and behavioral style. Let's talk about them in more detail. Directive style. Decision makers using directive style have low tolerance for ambiguity and are rational in their way of thinking. They are efficient and logical. Directive types make fast decisions and focus on the short run. Their efficiency and speed in making decisions often result in their making decisions with minimal information and assessing few alternatives. Analytic style. Decision makers with an analytic style have much greater tolerance for ambiguity than directive style decision makers. They want more information before making a decision and consider more alternatives than directive style decision maker does. Analytic decision makers are characterized as careful decision makers with the ability to adapt or cope with unique situations. Conceptual style. Individuals with a conceptual style tend to be very broad in their outlook and look at many alternatives. They focus on the long run and are very good at finding creative solutions to problems. Behavioral style. Decision makers with a behavioral style work well with others. They are concerned about the achievements of those around them and are receptive to suggestions from others. They often use meetings to communicate although they try to avoid conflict. Acceptance by others is important to this decision-making style. In terms of the level of participation, we know 5 basic types of decision-making. Leader makes the decision alone and announces it to the group members. This style takes little time and no involvement. It is used especially in emergencies, where immediate action is critical. Input is not helpful, quick action and immediate compliance is what counts. Leader gathers input from the group members as individuals and decides. The leader seeks input usually to cover blind spots and enhance their depth of understanding around the issue to be decided. Key individuals hold important information, and not consulting them would be foolish. Leader gathers input from the group and decides. Leader holds a group meeting and solicits input from them. He listens to the group's ideas and then takes that information and decides. Group decision making by consensus building. At this level, the leader is part of the group and he or she is just one vote or voice among many. The group processes all the information involved, compromises positions until everyone agrees. Leader delegates the decision making with the criteria or constraints to the group. Leader fully delegates the decision to the group and is not a part of the decision-making discussions. This level requires the leader to be very clear with the group as to what are the criteria or constraints that must be met for their decision to be able to move forward.
Although decision making is typically described as choosing among alternatives, that view is too simplistic. In fact, decision making is a comprehensive process, not just a simple act of choosing among alternatives. Even for something as straightforward as deciding where to go for lunch, you do more than just choose pasta or steak. Granted, you may not spend a lot of time complementing lunch decision, but you still need to go through the decision-making process.
Making decisions is a part of everyday life. Some consider it as a proficiency, others an art. Decisions may be personal or professional, but in each case, the choices will have often long-lasting consequences. In other words, the decisions we make have the potential to affect ourselves and others both in the short and in the long term. Therefore, it is valuable to possess a set of skills that will allow you to reflect and weigh alternatives, finally electing the option that is the most appropriate for each situation. Depending on the source and certain concepts, decision making is described as a process that consists of 6 to 11 steps. In this unit, we will present the concept that identifies an 8 steps process of making decisions. It begins with identifying a problem and decision criteria and allocating weights to those criteria, then moves to developing, analyzing, and selecting an alternative that can resolve the problem, implements the alternative, and concludes with evaluating the decision's effectiveness. This process can be used to describe both individual and group decision making. The 8-step decision making process. Identifying a problem. The decision making process begins with the existence of a problem or, more specifically, a discrepancy between an existing and a desired state of affairs. Effective problem definition isn't simple or trivial. In order to identify a problem, you should recognize and understand the three characteristics of the problem. You must be aware of the problem, you must be under pressure to act, and you must have the authority or resources to act. Identifying decision criteria. Once you have identified a problem, the decision criteria important to resolve the problem must be identified. That is, you must determine what's relevant in making decisions. Whether explicitly stated or not, every decision maker has criteria that guide his or her decision. These might include criteria such as costs that will be incurred, for example, investments required, risk likely to be encountered, for example, chance of failure, and outcomes that are desired, for example, growth of the firm. Allocating weights to the criteria. If the criteria identified in step 2 aren't equally important, the decision maker must weigh them in order to give them the correct priority in the decision. A simple approach to weight criteria is to give the most important criterion a weight of 10 and then assign weights to the rest compared with the standard. Thus, a criterion with a weight of 10 would be twice as important as one given a 5. Of course, you could use any other scale or any number as the highest weight, for example 100. The idea is to prioritize the criteria you identified in step 2 by assigning a weight to each of them. Developing alternatives. The fourth step in the decision-making process requires the decision maker to list viable alternatives that could resolve the problem. In this step, a decision maker needs to be quite creative. Analyzing alternatives. Once the alternatives have been identified, a decision maker must critically analyze each one by appraising it against the criteria established in steps 2 and 3. From this comparison, the strengths and weaknesses of each alternative become evident. Selecting an alternative. The sixth step is choosing the best alternative from among these considered. Once all the pertinent criteria in the decision have been weighted and viable alternatives analyzed, we choose the alternative that generated the highest total in step 5. Implementing the alternative. Step 7 is concerned with putting decision into action. This involves conveying the decision to those affected by it and getting their commitment to it. If the people who need to carry out a decision participate in the decision-making process, they are more likely to enthusiastically support the outcome than if you just tell them what they must do. Evaluating decision effectiveness. The last step in the decision-making process involves evaluating the outcome of the decision to see if the problem had been resolved. If the evaluation shows that the problem still exists, then the decision maker needs to assess what went wrong. Was the problem incorrectly defined? Were errors made when evaluating alternatives? Was the right alternative selected but poorly implemented? This answer might lead you to redo an earlier step or might even require starting the whole process over.
In the following part, we would analyze the advantages and disadvantages of both individual and group decision making. Individuals tend to ask questions and think before performing. This is especially useful when analyzing and predicting an individual behavior. Individual decision making has certain pros and cons, which we would analyze further. Group decision making is a type of participation in a decision making process in which several individuals act collectively, analyze problems or situations together, consider and evaluate alternative approaches, and choose one or more solutions from these alternatives. It has certain pros and cons, and we will talk about them further.
Pros of individual decision making. An individual generally makes prompt decisions. While a group is dominated by various people, decision making is quite time consuming. Moreover, assembling group members consumes also a lot of time. Individuals do not escape responsibilities. They are accountable for their acts and performance. While in a group, it is not easy to hold any one person accountable for a wrong decision. Individual decision making saves time, money, and energy, as individuals generally make prompt and logical decisions. On the other hand, group decision making consumes a lot of time, money, and energy. Individual decisions are more focused and rational as compared to group decisions. Cons of individual decision making. A group has potential to collect more information compared to an individual while making the decision. An individual while making any decision uses his own views and intuition, while a group has many members, so more views and approaches are considered, and hence it might result in a better decision. A group discovers hidden talents and core competencies of employees of an organization. An individual will not take into consideration interests of each member, while a group might take into account interests of all members of an organization. Pros of group decision making. Group decision making, ideally, takes advantage of the diverse strengths and expertise of its members. By tapping the unique qualities of the group members, it is possible that the group can generate a greater number of alternatives that are of higher quality than the individual can. If a greater number of higher quality alternatives is generated, then it is likely that the group will eventually reach a superior problem solution than the individual. Group decision making may also lead to a greater collective understanding of the eventual course of action chosen, since it is possible that many affected by the decision implementation had input into the decision. This may promote a sense of ownership of the decision, which is likely to contribute to a greater acceptance of the course of action selected and greater commitment on the part of the affected individuals to make this course of action successful. Cons of group decision making. Groups are generally slower to arrive at decisions than individuals, so sometimes it is difficult to utilize them in situations where decisions must be made very quickly. One of the most often cited problems of group decision making is groupthink. Groupthink occurs when individuals in a group feel pressure to conform to what seems to be the dominant view in the group. Dissenting views of the majority opinion are suppressed, and alternative courses of actions are not fully explored. Group polarization is another potential disadvantage of group decision making. This is the tendency of the group to converge on more extreme solutions to a problem. The risky shift phenomenon is an example of polarization. It occurs when the group decision is a riskier one that any of the group members would individually have made. This may result because individuals in a group sometimes do not feel as much responsibility and accountability for the action of the group as they would if they were making the decision alone.
In this section, we will consider the ethical aspects of decision making. Ethical decision is concerned with a judgment about what is right or wrong. An ethical decision is one where one chooses how to respond to a given situation based on values of good and bad, as opposed to only expediency or efficiency. This means it deals with moral issues. There is a number of factors that indicate the moral status. The decision is likely to have significant effect on others. It is concerned with harms and benefits. Consideration of social good, in other words, considerations of others beyond the self. The decision is likely to be characterized by choice, in that alternative courses of action are open. Moral decision requires that the decision makers have a choice. One or more parties perceive the decision as ethically relevant, regardless of whether the decision maker sees a decision as having ethical content, the others do, then the decision immediately incurs some degree of ethicality.
Ethical decision making and reasoning. The ability to assess whether something is right or wrong requires basic knowledge about the way, how can we assess it, ethical reasoning, and a reflection of criteria we use to provide the assessment. There are two major ethics theories that attempt to specify and justify moral rules and principles. Utilitarianism, also called consequentialism, and deontological ethics. Utilitarianism is a theory which states that only one thing, utility, is relevant to ethical decisions. The option that produces the greatest utility is the only ethical option. Deontologists believe that duties override everything else. A duty is a responsibility, an obligation, a binding commitment. Framework for understanding the ethical decision making. The ethical decision making models seek to represent two things. First, the different stages in decision making people go through in response to an ethical problem in a business context. And second, the different influences on that process. In this slide, we see both the phases or steps of ethical decision making, as well as the effects on ethical decision making. In terms of phases, we recognize four phases. Recognize a moral issue, make some kind of moral judgment about that issue, establish an intention to act upon that judgment, and act according to the intentions. In terms of influences on ethical decision making, the factors of the individual are shown here. These are unique characteristics of the individual actually making the relevant decision. These include factors that are given by birth, for example age or gender, and those acquired by experience and socializing, for example education and attitudes. We see also situational factors here. These features of the context influence whether the individual will make an ethical or an unethical decision. These include factors associated with the work context, for example, reward system, job roles, organizational culture, and those associated with the issue itself, such as the intensity of the moral issue or the ethical framing of the issue. Moral judgments can be made according to consideration of rights, duties, consequences, etc. There are different ethical theories. However, most researches indicate that managers tend to rely primarily on consequentialist thinking. The following slide provides an example of consequentialist ethics. Rationalizing unethical behavior. Rationalization tactics are mental strategies that allow individuals to view their corrupt acts as justified. It is a part of the process of moral framing that justifies unmoral actions. Under such strategies, we can identify denial of responsibility, denial of injury, denial of victim, social weighting, appeal to higher loyalties, and the metaphor of the ledger. For example, individuals argue that they are entitled to indulge in deviant behaviors because of their accrued credits. In this slide, you can see the individual strategies, their description, as well as examples of them. Thank you for your attention. More information about the project, as well as other training courses, can be found on the project website. This project was co-financed by the European Commission's Erasmus Plus program.